Unless this was a new game. The thought chilled her. Either way, it felt good to get into a fight. Something in her wanted to understand why he was different, but having tea parties with the crazies wasn't on her to-do list. She stretched and caught a whiff of herself. Oh God, she pulled the shirt away from her chest and wrinkled her nose. It was disgusting, crusted with sweat and dirt and river slime. No, her to-do list for today was cleaning up. The tunnels wove up and down, narrow and then wide and then narrow again. It was a spider web of darkness that she had long ago memorized. She could sense the slightest breeze or the smallest change in smell. Kira felt like a bat, every sense alive while her eyes remained useless. She took a deep breath, reveling in her freedom. Who thought a mass of caves could be freeing? The ground sloped steadily downward, rough beneath her feet. As she went lower, the sulfur smell grew stronger. The sound of the surf leaked through the rock, pounding out a heartbeat. Just when the sulfur smell grew unbearable, she saw a graying in the floor. Sulfur mingled with salt as she sat at the edge of the hole. Taking a deep breath, she pushed off. The water swallowed her, its warmth seeping through her clothes and into her skin. Gasping, she came up for air. The cave was full of steam. Hot spring pools dotted the cavern floor. They hissed as waves crashed over them, steam curling and spinning with the wind from outside. Kira swam to the edge of her pool until she could stand. Peeling off her clothes, she flung them against a rock. There was a sliver of left-over soap on the edge. Making a face, she grabbed it and began scrubbing. She'd be lucky if the piece lasted long enough to clean her hair, let alone her body. The soap stung her multitude of scratches and cuts and left a soft lavender scent on the air. The dirt suds slipped off her skin, light brown clouds in the water until it was swept out to sea. Kira scrubbed every inch of her body. It had been a while since her last bath, but she was starting to run out of soap. Baths weren't necessary, soap was. Finally finished scrubbing her scalp. She dipped herself underwater. She could feel her muscles unwinding and her body relaxing. This was good. After a while, she got out. Steam came off her skin as it hit the cave air and she shivered. Ah, she stretched again, relishing the feel of clean skin, and smiled. Snagging her dirty clothes, Kira left the hot springs behind and headed towards the center of the mountain. The sounds of the surf and the storm faded behind her as she worked her way ever deeper into the mountain. Kira let her fingertips trail against the wall, waiting for the dip that signaled the room behind it. Ah, there it was. She slipped around the slight corner and reached to the left. A light turned on and she was momentarily blinded. It threw blue-white light across a medium-sized cavern. The walls were covered with boxes and trinkets and pieces of her past life, columns of plastic that reached from floor to ceiling. Black lettering marked the contents inside, but she couldn't make it out. After the darkness, the light was too much. She chuckled softly. Maybe I am becoming part bat. Gradually her eyes acclimated and she set the light to the manual setting. The battery bar flickered green, as it should. She recharged the solar battery a few months back out of habit more than anything else. They were supposed to last for up to a year, but these batteries were getting old. 8 years below ground hadn't left them in the best condition. Kira turned back to the room and grimaced. The silence was deafening. It was one of the reasons Kira avoided the place. After the sounds of the surf and the birds and life, the cavern was a shock. She couldn't help the uneasy feeling that crept over her skin. She hugged herself, trying to shake it. The place reminded her of death. It was the one place in the entire mountain that Kira hated. It was a reminder of everything that she'd lost. Suppressing a shiver, she pressed a little bump just behind her right ear. Music flooded her mind. Classic rock from the 20s beat out a steady beat, overwhelming the silence around her. Kira let out a sigh of relief. The box she wanted was made of the clear plastic all the colonists had used for storage. It sat half open, the first in a row of 10. Khaki pants filled the bin, women's and men's, and Kira started to dig around. It had bothered her in the beginning, wearing dead people's clothes. Survival quickly overrode that. As refreshing as it was to walk around naked, she hadn't been alone in the beginning. Now, it was just a habit. It was her safety net, reminding her that she was human. Here we go, she muttered, tugging out a faded pair. As she pulled them on, she felt a pang of annoyance. Why cool DNT women's pants do the same thing as men's? Length and width. Was that so much to ask? It wasn't like she had hips to measure for. The hem hit her a few inches above her ankle. Cursing, she slid them off and flipped open her knife. Damn short people make me do all the work, them and their short legs. She held up the mangled pants and nodded, satisfied with their new cropped appearance. Shirts were much easier. She grabbed one off the top of the shirts box and slipped it over her head. The faded army logo hugged her lean frame, but she didn't bother looking for another shirt. The tighter the better. There was less chance of it catching on something. Stretching, she smiled. There was nothing quite like the feel of clean clothes. Her eye caught something in the far corner, carefully placed on a flattened stalagmite. The stalactite above it had been sawed away to put a little motion light in the ceiling. Kira frowned, trying to remember why they put a light in. Curious, she walked over. Kira flicked it off when it awoke. If the other went out, this one's battery would be useful. A standard issue box sat on the stalagmite, gray plastic walls scratched and worn. For the life of her, she couldn't remember what was inside of it. She had only come ever down here for clothes and supplies. This part of the cabin was sectioned off from the rest, free from the clutter of boxes. A lock hung from the door of the box. She let it rest in her palm, staring from the lock to the box and back. Had there ever been something they needed to lock up? Kira gasped as she realized what it was and knelt before the crate. Her fingers rested on its side, shaking slightly. Inside the box was the only video player they had been able to save. She hadn't seen another face in so long. Carefully, she undid the combination, her ears pricking at each click. The door let out a quiet sigh as she opened it. The back wall of the box appeared through the semi-transparent blue screen, the logo of the shuttle catching the faint light. The Earth Trade Association's emblem caught just above it, an eerie reminder of what had become of Earth. It was the perfect safe, the plastic virtually indestructible and weatherproof. The vid screen itself took up the entire box. It sat on a back stand like a picture frame, the computer embedded in the frame and the screen a thin mesh of LED wires. Her eyes tried to focus on the screen but kept shifting to the back of the box. She sighed. Each time she looked through a vid screen it gave her goosebumps. It had an unnatural feel to it, both ethereal and profane. Kira rubbed her finger against her pant leg in a vain effort to get dirt off the tip, then gently touched the screen. It jumped to life, little white boxes popping up in the corner with names like Harvest 2087 and Welcome Isaiah. She clicked on one that said New Year 2089 and waited. There was a soft whirring from the screen's frame. Is it on? The voice was young and male and a little slow. She sat back on her heels, tingles all over. Yeah, but you've got the cap on, you idiot, another male. This one slightly irritated. Light suddenly burst onto the screen, and a pimple-marked young man peered out at her. There. Now you can actually see what you re-recording. Oh well. I could see what I was recording before. The camera couldn't. The recorder sounded a little sheepish. The visible man rolled his eyes and backed up. The disembodied voice continued. Where is everyone? It's almost midnight. The other shrugged. I asked Joan to make some pies, and Sam said he was going to bring some of that fruit wine he finally finished, but I don't know where they are. He started to say something else, but she reached out and pressed the fast-forward button. Chit-chat had always bored her. Now wasn't any different. When she stopped, there was a crowd of people. There were men and women and children, all rosy-faced and smiling. These were her family. In the least, she shared the same 46 chromosomes with them. Kira watched, devouring the sight of humanity. They were watching a huge digital clock. She could remember it from her own village, a huge solar-powered beast that kept time exactly. 7654321. They all chanted, Happy New Year. There was kissing and drinking and cheering, and one little boy eewed at his mother and father. Someone in the back shouted, 3 years and still alive. Everyone laughed. There was a pit in her stomach as she watched them, happy and free. 3 years. They had 1 year left, then. Kira swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. People God, she was lonely. She chose another video. A group of women were huddled together and an older woman pulled herself out of the crowd, wagging a finger. Get out of here. I know what you re-planning. I do. Don't think you can get around me like that. You boys can see her until she walks down that aisle. Now shoo. That one was a little easier to watch, even if weddings bored her. The next video had a gurgling baby and a laughing older brother. The brother bounced the baby and threw her in the air. And the baby howled with laughter. She smiled and brushed her fingers across the smiling pair, their faces warping under the touch. The next was a play. Then there was one of women shucking corn. She eventually lost track of the videos. She was swimming in humanity, reliving other people's memories. She could feel her own memories slowly coming back. She had resented her life. Not these people. In their own way, they'd been kind to her. The Griffins had taken this all away from her. They took the friends and the leaders and the teachers and destroyed it. They destroyed everything. The screen fogged over and Kira hastily blinked the tears away. These people were so real. Each one had a name and a life and a story that no one would ever know. That was how life was supposed to be. They're in the little clear screen, happy and busy and going. The videos played themselves out and moved on to the next until she found herself watching a young girl. Her auburn hair was long and loose, hanging down the middle of her back in copper waves. Her golden brown eyes stared into the camera. Kira held her breath. The little girl's eyes were serious and not at all congruent with her age. She could have been more than 13, still boyish and round-faced. Sullenly, she kept glaring at whoever was behind the camera. Kira caught herself tracing the lines of the face, her fingers denting the screen and warping the image. Hastily, she drew back her hand. That little girl was her. She was so innocent, so intent on talking about her fish. There was no fear in her eyes and there were no scars on her face. It was high and brisk, the voice of someone very confident and very annoyed. It hit her harder than any of the other videos. She had changed. This Kira, this child, had been bitter coming to this planet, but she hadn't known hardship yet. She hadn't seen death. She had felt it, but she hadn't seen it. Something in her wanted that little girl back. Kira couldn't stand it. She pressed the off button and slammed the door to the safe shut. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Darkness greeted her. She closed her eyes again, wishing for the relief of sleep. Kira lay in the dark for a while, listening to the silence. Every now and then, there was a distant drip. The images played through her mind again and again in the darkness. Their lives haunting her. Of everyone, she was the only one to survive. It seemed like some cruel twist of fate. She swallowed, her throat still thick from her crying, and sat up. The light sensor above her flickered on, its light flickering off the frame of the vid screen. Kira paused. It seemed wrong to shut them away again down here, but the pain was still too much. She massaged the back of her neck and sighed. Just for now. I'll leave you down here. Gingerly, she shut and locked the box. She arrived in her room in a daze. Her foot caught on the lip of the cabin, jarring her back to reality. Kira leaned against the entrance and stared out across Calypso. The night was black and cloudy. Except for occasional lightning flashes. Everything was dark. The air was charged with the coming storm, ozone pricking at her skin. Kira watched the waves roll below her. The surf thundered against the cliffs, oblivious to anything except its carved-out path. She chuckled and made her way to her hammock. Now I am envious of waves. I must really be losing it. She went to stand at the edge, letting her hair catch in the wind and flip against her face. The ragged hairs tickled her cheeks and nose. She pushed it behind her ears, her fingers lingering in the choppy ends. Once her hair had been a thing of pride. She remembered the girl from the video with the long flowing copper waves. After watching another woman's neck break because of her ponytail, Kira cut it all off. Pride was useless on this planet. She frowned, eyes following the coast in search of the griffin's ever-present shadow. Nothing hovered today in the gloom. Kira bit her lip and settled back on the hammock. Yesterday hadn't been like any other attack before. She tried to remember exactly what happened. What had he wanted? It was so uncharacteristic for any of them to stand still, let alone speak to her. Kira stared at her hands. Trying to figure it out. Had something changed? Was this a new tactic? She scrubbed her face with her hands and flopped back. A cave bat stared down at her, its triple eyes swiveling from her to the hammock and back to her. Thinking one tea feed my belly, will it? The bat squeaked and dropped, wings opening inches above her face. Kira watched as its dark form vanished into the dark. Hungry, she stood and grabbed a canvas pack against the far wall. The aroma of fruit wafted her and her stomach rumbled. Dinnertime, she breathed. Kira reached in and grabbed nothing. Panicking, she opened the bag as wide as it could go, but it was too dark to see into it. She shook it upside down and ran her hand all inside. Nothing, shit. The bag smacked into the wall. The fruit had been the last food she had. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what happened. She should have had more than enough. Something skittered in the darkness, eyes flickering blue-green before vanishing. Kira groaned and sat down heavily. Of course, the cave bat alone should have been a clue. Did Calypso really have a vendetta against her? She grimaced and tossed the bag against the wall. Now she had to go outside. Unarmed or not, she had to eat. She hadn't meat in days and the fruit had just barely been getting her by. Shit, shit, shit. The cave echoed as she pounded the ground. Really, her luck was absolutely terrific. No weapons and no food. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the cave. Her bow leaned against the wall, its bleached wood bright in the sudden light. All of her arrows were gone, dropped at the river and ruined in the rain. Pushing herself up, Kira searched for her stash of untipped arrows. 1.2.3, they clinked softly against each other as she counted. 20 should be enough. Kira glanced around the cave, searching for her little cup of thorns. She could always make more. Her eyes fell on the empty cup and she snorted. Of course it'd be empty. Without a weapon, she would have to stay here. It would be suicide to go out so soon after an encounter. Her stomach grumbled angrily. You are always running, always hiding. Kira shivered and looked behind her. His voice had seemed so close, so mocking. She searched the little cabin, almost expecting him to jump out. She shook her head angrily. This was insane. It's just the hunger. She watched the clouds scuttle across the sky and bit her thumbnail. She had water. She would be fine for a few days. Her stomach clenched and she winced, holding her stomach. 2 days. I can make it for 2 days. Angrily she kicked at the empty canvas bags. Their smell was almost unbearable. You a coward, aren't you? Kira flinched. No one had ever called her a coward. She dug her nails into her palms, trying to fight the urge to hide. Her stomach rumbled again and she threw her hands up. I give up. I am not a coward, and I need food. If I can just fix the trap. She stood and forced herself to breathe. The trap would fill up quick enough and she could hide out for another week or so. Lightning flashed again and illuminated her bow. Its edges were smooth from night spent perfecting the finish and the ends curved wickedly out. She picked it up, trailing her fingers down the curve of the bow. It was heavy enough to be a club and the ends were sharp enough to cause serious injury. She had her weapon. She had no excuse not to go out. You have something to say. Kira grabbed her bow and headed down. Asterisk 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 asterisk. Thunder rumbled through a forest heavy with the scent of rain and ozone. It wrapped her in an electric blanket, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. Kira glanced up at the heavy clouds and grimaced. She wouldn't have long to fix the trap. Sighing, she readjusted her bow. The forest was still, boughs heavy with fruit and the weight of the storm to come. Let us get this over with. She moved quickly, careful not to leave tracks. Fallen leaves and petals stuck to her legs, but she herself left nothing behind. Kira forced herself to stay in the open a little longer before ducking under an overhang. As much as she tried to deny it, his accusations had hit home. Her mind was in turmoil. By nature, she hated Calypso's inhabitants. They were vicious, bloodthirsty animals whose only goal in life was to torment her. She had spent years running from them and praying for their collective deaths. Kira sighed to herself, brushing a vine out of her way. Kira dug her nails into the bottom of her palm, trying to center herself. Now was not the time to lose focus. Her bow tapped lightly against her shoulder, keeping beat with her steps, and she found herself humming a tune from earlier. Thunder rolled again, and she glanced up. Kira was in the open, in the dark, racing a storm. She dodged a fern frond and jumped from one root to another. The trees whispered in the growing wind, their bright clue bark standing out in the flashes. Watching the sky, she hummed quietly to herself. Tonight she would live or die. She needed all the courage she could get, even if it was from some crappy 2020s rock band. Kira heard the rush of the water minutes before she reached the fringe of the forest. Adrenaline pumping, she scanned the bank. Nothing moved. Licking dry lips, she skirted the open beach and knelt before a massive gnarled tree. Under a nearby bush was a shallow hole where she had hidden her supplies months back. Holding the branches away, Kira pulled back the tarp. Wood gleamed slickly in the storm's light. It didn't look any worse for wear, even with the constant rain. Kira glanced over her shoulder before pulling out 2 3-foot-long poles. The wood was still supple, and she threw them towards the trap. A few pieces of tack and some string and she would be good. She pulled a fist-sized piece off the block, hefting the tack in her hand. It was silvery and semi-solid in its pre-use form, almost like a super duct tape putty. In the early days, the survivors had scavenged boxes upon boxes of the stuff. They were gathering dust in the storage cavern now, next to all the other remnants of their lives. Her hand tightened on the putty and she sighed. Those thoughts were best left to after she fixed the trap. Tonight was about facing fears, not reliving them. All right, Kira, you have 30 minutes. She tossed it up and caught it, feeling surprisingly good for her earlier depression. There was something empowering about facing death. The irony made her smile. She stood, all senses alight for any hint of company. The trees bent in the wind, leaves brushing her face. Lightning tattooed her skin briefly before leaving her in darkness again. She took a deep breath, slipped her bow off, and stepped to the edge of the shadows. The rods quivered in her other hand, their sides clicking together. Kira licked her lips nervously again and stepped onto the beach. Within moments, she was at the water's edge, crouched with her bow at the ready. The forest bowed and twisted but nothing moved in the darkness. Kira narrowed her eyes. Would she see him even if she tried? Lightning cracked above her and she shook herself out of her thoughts, casting one more glance at the trees before setting her bow within reaching distance of the water. Grabbing the poles, she waded out into the water and began her repairs. Over the next hour the lightning steadily grew closer and louder. Her hands worked fast in the cold water, untying and cutting the strings of the net and readying and fastening them onto the new poles. The net was slippery with algae and it took almost all her concentration to get it tied and glued on. Damn it, the wayside ripped out of her hands again and Kira lunged for it, her fingers cramping from the chill water. The wood bit into her palms and her knees burned from scraping the river rocks, but she had the side. The current pulled at it, trying to rip it from her grasp. Just a little more. Her arms ached, exhausted from fighting the water. Finally, the two ends were tied and puttied. She allowed herself a moment's admiration. With the wayside net fixed, the others would take only a few minutes. Kira smiled briefly. She still had some small skill. She hadn't lost it all in the months since she made the trap. The air was heavy, casting a thick silence over the forest. Even the rush of water was muted. Thunder split the sky again, breaking through her thoughts. The lightning flashes were closer together now, but the rain had yet to make its appearance. This would be a big storm. She needed to hurry. Kira focused her attention on the trap, shutting out everything else. It wouldn't matter what he did if she let herself get caught in the storm. The net held on the last piece of the side. She stepped back with her hands on her hips and admired her work. Already there were a few fish. One nipped at her ankle and she kicked at it. Satisfied, Kira turned to pull herself out. He was watching her. She swallowed her terror and lowered her foot to the ground. He squatted by the edge of the forest, a strange expression on his face. Tonight, his markings glowed a muted green. She could have sworn that they had been blue the night before. They stared at each other mutely for a few seconds. She licked her lips, shivering from the cold and the wind. It will rain. Kira blinked, surprised. His face hardened slightly, and she arched an eyebrow. It will. She shook her head in disbelief. Water dripped off her as she pulled herself out of the river. Probably, she said. Kira hated how her voice shook. Even now, her past refused to let her go. She knelt slowly and picked up her bow, never taking her eyes off him. The man stood, keeping his movements small. Kira's eyebrows rose higher. Was he trying not to scare her, or was this another trap? The griffin was missing tonight and Kira couldn't help looking into the shadows. Was it waiting for her? Hiding in the bushes for when she ran? Something dripped onto her shoulder and she dropped to a crouch, bow balanced lightly in front of her. The man snorted and she glared at him. Another raindrop hit her on the cheek. He nodded as if to say I told you so. But Kira ignored him. Brushing the drops off her shoulder, she stood and dropped the bow to her side. He snorted again. What did you build? Kira frowned, eyes darting from the river to him. Excuse me, what did you build? He stepped forward slowly, muscles rippling under his skin. His marks were a light green now, swirls of deep blue tinging the edges. Kira stood frozen. Her mind seemed to have deserted her. All the questions she had wanted to ask vanished as he approached. What did you build? He asked again. Kira wrinkled her nose at his patronizing tone. They watched each other, but Kira refused to play his game. Lightning flashed, illuminating the banks, and the skies ripped open. The rain pounded the ground, drenching her in moments. Kira grimaced at the suddenness so typical of tropical storms. He glared up at the sky and then at her. Come, long fingers motioned for her to follow him. She tightened her grip on the bow. Come, he said again. He didn't look like someone who was used to being denied. Kira lifted her bow slightly, feeling the first hints of real fear. Her voice deserted her and she licked her lips. No, he stepped back in surprise. Then hissed. She steadied herself on the rocks, uncomfortable in his stare. I am not an idiot. I won't follow you. He rolled his eyes in annoyance. It's raining. She nodded. I'll survive. With you. I don't have that guarantee. The rain bit into her skin, harsher than any earthen rain. She hid the pain, focusing all her energy on him. His mouth twitched. I won't kill you. A hoarse laugh escaped her mouth. He honestly expected her to believe him. When she didn't move, he bared his teeth and headed towards her. Kira braced herself to run, but he was at her side in a moment. Distantly, she noticed that it only took him a few strides. Come, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her towards the forest. Her bare feet slid over the rocks, unable to slow his progress. Panicking, she swung her bow and caught him square in the jaw. He staggered back and let go of her wrist, but she couldn't move. The pieces of her bow lay scattered across the ground. His face had broken her bow. Terrified, she watched him work his jaw. Those weird eyes fixed on her and the blood drained from her body. His hand was steel on her wrist before she could move. You will come. Kira didn't have a choice. As they stumbled into the forest. Kira cursed her arrogance. She should have waited until she was starving to come back to her fish trap. She should have fixed the trap faster. She shouldn't have hit him. There were so many things she should have done. Why had she let his words get to her? Leaves slapped in her face, and she kept tripping over roots and into plant pods. They lit up purple-blue in protest, one exploding across her foot. The fluorescent nectar clung to her leg, eerily bright in the darkness of the storm. She gasped as he pulled her through the jungle. Her wrist looked tiny in his massive hand and she suppressed the urge to scream. So far he hadn't done anything directly violent. Even after her failed attempt to hurt him, her mind raced. Was there a reason he needed her alive? The pain from the rain and the effort of running slows her mind down. Kira took a deep breath, focusing on his back. If he wanted her alive, she could use that to her advantage. A root tripped her and she pitched forward. Blue bark jumped out at her, its surface studded with thick yellow thorns. He jerked her up, inches away from one, and she screamed in agony. Fire lanced up her arm, her shoulder completely dislocated. He didn't stop to fix it. Just switched to the other wrist and kept going. Kira bit back sobs, lights dancing before her from the pain. She could barely see 10 feet in front of her, and the mountain was completely lost in the rain. Everything was a blur of gray, whether because of the storm or by her shock she couldn't tell. Her wrist began to ache as the skin pulled under his grip, and she focused on the pain. It helped bring her back to reality. Pain shot up her arm as he pulled her over a log. Kira bit her lip to keep back the cry. She had to think. She had to get away. She was smarter than this. There had to be a way. Leaves whipped around in the wind, slapping against her face as he dragged her ever deeper into the forest. She winced and stared at his back. 8 years ago, she had run like this with another man. Kira bit the inside of her cheek. Tasting blood. The panic receded slightly. She refused to think about that day. The ground gave way beneath her and she slammed into his back. He hissed and glared over his shoulder at her. Lightning lit up his face, transforming it into a horrific mask. Visions of the attacks assaulted her senses and she could suddenly smell the acid and burning flesh again. Lightning flashed again and he pulled her forward. It was too much. The videos and his face, it was all too much. She bit her lip, trying to hold back the terror. No, 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 no. The moan spiraled into a scream. Kira writhed in his grip, surprising him enough to twist out of it. Her dislocated arm swung limply beside her. The memories were too strong. No, I won't let you. No, she screamed at him. His hand snapped around to grab her wrist, but he paused. Blue gold eyes watching it swing lifeless. Kira spun around to run, but he caught her good wrist. She could feel the skin stinging but instincts were taking over. He didn't say a word.